Hello everyone, hola, and welcome to this Spanish GCSE and iGCSE video tutorial. So in this particular video tutorial, we are going to look at the Spanish GCSE and iGCSE reading paper. And I'm going to take you through some of the most common question types across all of the exam boards as well, and show you the exam technique required and how to go about answering each of these question types one by one and step by step. So it should be very useful for all students. Okay, so just before we get into it, my name is Dhananjay Talwar, and I studied French and Italian for my MA at the University of Cambridge. I graduated back in 2015, some time ago now, and I have been an educator since that time, mostly as a full-time tutor. I've learned more than 20 languages myself, to different levels, of course, but that does include at least 9 of them to fluency. And yeah, it's been a very enjoyable experience. It's something I really enjoy doing. And I equally love motivating my students, making sure they know how to learn languages efficiently and how to enjoy the process as well, which is the key. I love to make sure that they are aware of all these things and that they know how to reach their goals and target grades. And I've done this already with more than 500 different students, helping them to achieve or surpass their target grade for GCSE or iGCSE exams for different languages as a full-time tutor. So I've taught about 8 languages to GCSE or iGCSE levels so far, and some of those, of course, at higher levels as well. Right, this is a quick look at the Spanish GCSE and iGCSE exam boards. So as of August 2025, there are 4 different exam boards for GCSE Spanish and 2 for iGCSE Spanish. There are some differences from exam board to exam board. Pearson and Excel iGCSE, for instance, still has a combined reading and writing paper rather than having separate papers for each of those skills. So I do recommend keeping up to date with developments for your exam board and being aware of which exam board you are studying as early as you can. The subject of this particular video, though, is the reading paper. In this video, we're going to look at question types for the reading exam for Spanish GCSE or iGCSE across all of those exam boards that we just saw. So what I've done is I've compiled a list of the most common question types. So this is not an exhaustive list of absolutely every single question type that you could possibly come across in your reading paper, but this is certainly a comprehensive list of the most common question types that you're most likely to see in your reading exam, regardless of which exam board you're taking. And those include gap fill questions, multiple choice type questions, questions where you have to answer true, false, or not mentioned, questions asking you to identify the correct statements, questions where you have to answer in English, questions where you have to answer in Spanish, and translation as well. In the reading exam, it would typically be translation from Spanish into English if translation is part of your reading paper. But you'll see that I've put that in brackets over here. And that is because translation is not covered in this particular video. I do have a separate video on translation in both directions, so from Spanish to English and from English to Spanish. And I highly recommend watching that video if translation is part of your Spanish GCSE or iGCSE exams as well. In this video, though, we're going to look at all of the other question types that are mentioned here, and we're going to go through those one by one. And I'm going to take you through the necessary techniques that you need to hone, be aware of, and then practice as much as you can with the aim, ultimately, of being able to instantly recognize what type of question you are faced with in an exam situation, and then instantly knowing what technique you need to implement and how you can answer that question as best as possible to score marks. So let's start. The first of these question types is gap fill questions. Gap fill questions are actually fairly common in the reading paper across most exam boards. And for each of these questions, I will show you one example taken from a specific past paper. This particular one comes from the 2022 paper for WJEC EDUCAS. I'll give you the techniques required for that particular question type. And take you through an example of how to implement them as well. So you can see that for gap fill questions, you'll normally be given a passage, as you can see here, with certain gaps in. Each of these gaps in this particular example are numbered from 1 to 6. And each of those gaps has to be filled with the correct word from the list given just below. So for each gap fill question, you will have a list of words to choose from as well. And those words are given here just below from A to H. So the way I would go about this is, and I do have quite a specific and particular technique for gap fill questions, which can be very useful too, because I know this is not necessarily what many students will do or have learnt up till now. But I would start off every one of these question types by reading through the information given and the instructions carefully. It's essential that you know how to answer the question and what you've got to do to score the marks. So I would start by reading through these instructions here carefully. It says, read the information about a Spanish school, complete the text using words in the list or from the list, write the correct letter in in the space. So the next thing I would do is read through all of the options. So for all of those words from A to H, make sure you're aware of what the options you can possibly choose from are. And then I would read through the text itself. That's the procedure I would follow for every single one of these question types. Make sure you read the instructions first, and then make sure you're aware of all of the possible options you have to choose from and what they mean as well. However, for these gap fill questions, what I would do, which is not what many students have been taught, is to use the grammar to help you, first of all. And I'll give you an example of this. So often you can use the grammar to narrow down your options and then read through the passage and identify which of those few options that you've identified that could grammatically fit within the sentence is correct. So if we look at number 1 here, it says, para los something interesados en matricularse. So for those something interested in matriculating or graduating, essentially, we have to obviously fill in that gap. And we know that that gap comes just after the word los. Los is one of the Spanish words for the, and los is, in particular, it's a masculine plural form for the word the in Spanish. So that already tells us that the word that goes into this gap must be masculine and plural. So we can already look through our list of words and eliminate all of the options that are not masculine plural nouns, because we know that those cannot possibly be the correct answer. And so even without really reading through the text or looking at it in any detail, we can considerably reduce the number of options to just C or E. C, deberes, meaning homework, or E, alumnos, meaning pupils or students. Those are the only possible options that are masculine plural nouns. And therefore, grammatically, those are the only ones that could fit in this first gap over here. So you can see that the grammar has helped considerably in narrowing down the number of possible options. And therefore, particularly if you're stuck or unsure of what the right answer is, the grammar can really help you to get closer to identifying it. So that's what I would always start with for gap fill type questions. Once you've narrowed down the options, like we've done here, I've narrowed down the options to just 2. You could use the text to decide which one of those is correct. So then you can look at the meaning of the words, and you can see that out of the 2 options, homework or pupils, or pupils/students, you can see that the word pupils definitely makes the most sense because we're talking about graduating from school. And therefore, the answer must be E rather than C. That is the process that I would follow step by step for gap fill questions, which is a very useful technique. Make sure you also watch out for trick questions, which are very common, and pay attention to the details. For the reading and listening exams, it's very common to come across trick questions where the text appears to indicate one answer is correct, whereas it's actually something else. Yeah, perhaps there's information given slightly later, or the finer details, which actually rule out the answer that might seem to be the obvious correct one. So you do have to pay attention to details for these questions as well. Okay, and these are the answers for this particular example. You can see that I would definitely use the grammar to help me and to narrow down the options for gap fill questions. There is a variety of different gap fill questions that can come up. So sometimes it might not be as useful to use the grammar to help you in this exact way, but it can often work very, very well to narrow down your options. So I would use the grammar first and then look at the meaning of the words that you have as potential options. Don't just use the meanings of these words to decide which one goes in which gap. Okay, the second type of question is multiple choice style questions. This particular example comes from a 2022 paper for AQA. And multiple choice questions are, again, very popular, very common in the reading paper. And this is when you're given a text, as always, and then you're given a few options to choose from. Normally, for multiple choice type questions, you have to select one correct answer out of the options. And the number of options that you're given can vary, of course, too. Often it will be 3, as is the case here, but not necessarily. So, as with every question, I'd read the instructions first. I would read through the text in full. I know many students are tempted to just skip parts of the text or to read through the potential questions and answers first and only then read through bits of the text. I would read through the whole text first to get an overview, and then I would read through each question one by one. Make sure you understand what the question is asking. Make sure you note how many marks are available for that question. That can be a useful guide as well. And then read through all of the options and make sure you understand those as well, because that can help you help guide you as to what information to look out for in the text. Then I would of course go back to the text and try and see which of those options is correct. For multiple choice questions, it is particularly important not to just write down the first answer that appears to be correct, because, as mentioned, trick questions are really common for the reading and listening papers, not just for multiple choice questions, but really for all of them. And elimination can be an especially useful technique for multiple choice questions too. So if you have, say, 3 options to choose from, you may not be entirely sure what the correct answer is. So if we look at 2.1, for instance, it's asking, where was Pablo when he first heard Álvaro de Luna's song? And you may not be sure of which one of these options, A, at a concert, B, at a festival, or C, at a party, is the correct one. But, for example, you may be relatively sure that C, at a party, is certainly not the correct answer. So you could mentally eliminate or rule out C, and even by eliminating answers, that hugely increases the chances of getting this correct. Because even if you then have a random guess, you have fewer answers to choose between and an increased likelihood of selecting the correct answer. So elimination can be very useful for any question where you have to choose between a limited number of options. Make sure you read the question and answers carefully. I would try and do that first, and then go back to the text to try and decide which of those is correct. So you certainly use the information in the text to help you. The answers should all be in the text for these kinds of questions. For 2.1, you can see the answer is actually at the end of this second paragraph, where it says, La canción de Álvaro de Luna me encantó desde la primera vez que la oí. Fue en un concierto y ahora la ponen en todas las fiestas y festivales. Meaning, the song by Álvaro de Luna, I loved the song by Álvaro de Luna ever since the first time I heard it. It was in a concert, and now they play it in all parties and festivals. So the answer is clearly A, at a concert, but you can also see how many students could be misled because the word for party, fiesta, is also in there within the same sentence, and so is the word for a festival, festivales. So that's why it's important not to just to rush through and select the first answer that appears correct. Okay, these are the answers for this particular example, and that is the necessary technique which you can then practice. Now let's move on to number 3, which is true, false, or not mentioned questions. This particular example comes from a 2023 paper for AQA. Again, And it comes from a fairly famous play, actually, called Yerma by the playwright Federico García Lorca. For all of these questions, you will again be presented with the instructions and a text. And you will then be given a series of statements. We can see these statements here from 1 to 4. For every single one of those statements, you have to decide whether that statement is true, false, or not mentioned in the text. And you would simply normally you'd put T for true, or F for false, or not mentioned, or NM for not mentioned. Of course, use the text very much to help you. And you do have to pay attention to the finer details within the text too. It can be quite easy to skip over them and therefore to make a small mistake that way as well. Be careful to read over the statements thoroughly as well. For example, things like negatives can completely change the sense of a statement. If you read this as Juan does like milk instead of Juan does not like milk, then you could easily get the answer to 7.1 wrong. And apart from that, these types of questions generally come down to locating where the correct answer lies or doesn't lie in the text. And of course, being careful to pay attention to details as well. If we look at 7.3 as an example here, that says Yerma would like Juan to stop swimming in the river. And we can see whether that's true, false, or not mentioned in Yerma's speech right at the end, where it says, pero tú no, cuando nos casamos eras otro, ahora tienes la cara blanca como si no te diera el sol, a mí me gustaría que fueras al río y nadaras. Which means, but you know, when we got married, you were something else or someone else. Now you have a white face as if you didn't get the sun, something along those lines. I would like you to go to the river and swim. And that last part clearly shows that 7.3, that statement, is false. Yerma does not want Juan to stop swimming in the river. She actually wants him to go swimming more often in the river. So that is, an example of the technique required for these true, false, or not mentioned questions. Okay, these are the answers for this particular example. And now let's move on to questions which ask you to identify the correct statements. Again, there's an example this time from a 2023 paper from Pearson at Excel GCSE. So for these questions, you will always have a text, as with all reading exam question types. The text in question is on the left-hand side, and the question itself is on the right. For questions asking you to identify the correct statements, you'll be presented with a series of statements, which you can see here from A to G, and you'll have to select a certain number of statements as being correct or truthful, depending on the information provided in the actual text. So definitely the answers for these questions must be in the text. And another thing to pay attention to is how many statements there are, which can vary. Here we have 7 of them, but that can change. And how many of those statements you have to select as correct. So here it says clearly put a cross in each of the 3 correct boxes. So you've got to identify which 3 statements are correct out of 7. But both of those numbers can vary. So make sure you read the instructions very carefully too. What I would do for these questions is certainly, as with all of these question types, I'd make sure to read the text fully first. Again, here you've got a limited number of options to choose between, so you can certainly use elimination to help you narrow down the options as well. If we look at statement A, for example, which says it is better not to do extreme sports, if we read through the first paragraph and the first few lines of the text, it says, la psicóloga Mostajo nos dice, practicar deportes es muy bueno para estar sano, practicar deportes extremos es todavía mejor, which means the psychologist Mostajo tells us playing sports is very good to be healthy. Playing extreme sports or taking part in extreme sports is even better. And even though it slightly contradicts that later on in that paragraph, that is enough to indicate that statement A, it is better not to do extreme sports, is false, is incorrect. and therefore you can mentally eliminate option or statement A. You could even put an X somewhere else on the exam paper. Be careful not to make it look as if you're trying to indicate that A is actually correct. But you could put an X or some sign just as almost as a note to yourself to indicate that you've eliminated that statement as incorrect. And that can, of course, narrow down your options and increase the chances of getting the right answers. Again, make sure you watch out for trick questions. Make sure you pay attention to the details. It does say, for example, in this text that practicing or taking part in extreme sports can be even better, but you have to be very careful with safety. So all of those finer details, which can come afterwards as well, and potentially seem to contradict information that's been given before, those could change the potential answers as well. So watch out for that. Okay, and here are actually the correct answers for this example, which are C, D, and F. Now, moving on to our penultimate question type, which is where you've got to answer in English. This, again, comes from an AQA paper from 2023. As with all questions, read through the instructions carefully first. Make sure you understand what you've got to do, and then read through the text. I would always read through the text in full, actually, at least once. Here, of course, you have to answer questions on the text in English. So it's essentially an English comprehension where you've got to provide answers in English. Now, the text itself will always be in Spanish, of course, but these questions do largely come down to using the text to help you as much as possible. So finding where the answer lies exactly within the text and simply translating that part into English as appropriate. So, you have to locate where the answer comes in the text. Then you have to translate that part of the text. And you also have to make sure to answer every part of the question as well. Both of these questions are worth 1 mark each. Sometimes you can come across questions worth more than that. And if a question is, say, worth 2 marks, then you'd normally have to provide 2 different pieces of information to score those 2 marks. So it's important not to leave anything out. If we look at question number 1 here as an example, that asks, what exactly has Rosalén won her most recent award for? Answer is given right at the end of that first paragraph where it says, además, hace poco tiempo recibió un premio por la mejor canción para una película, which means, what's more, very recently she won a prize for the best song for a film. So you would simply take the correct part of the passage where the answer is, which is at the end of this first paragraph here, and translate the appropriate or required part into English. You do not have to answer in full sentences for these kinds of questions. And if there's any doubt, you would always respond in the same language that the question itself is written in, although it should also indicate very, very clearly on the question paper which language you should answer in too. So for this kind of question, I would simply write down something like the best song for a film. So essentially, you've taken the answer from that last sentence of the first paragraph and located exactly within that sentence where the answer is, and just translated that part of the sentence from Spanish into English. These are the answers for both questions in the example here. And now let's go on to questions where you've got to answer in Spanish. So this is a final type of question, and this particular example comes from a 2023 paper for Pearson Edexcel GCSE. For the 2 exam boards, Pearson Edexcel GCSE and AQA, actually, who have just changed their syllabus for their exams, for language exams for GCSE from 2026 onwards. You no longer actually have questions requiring you to answer in Spanish for reading or listening, which some students might be glad to hear, but they certainly can come up for other exam boards. So these questions are very similar to the ones where you've got to answer in English, but of course it's a reading comprehension in Spanish instead. We have the text given here on the left-hand side with all the necessary information in there. Here are the instructions which say, answer the questions in Spanish. You do not have to write full sentences. It's important to note that you definitely do not have to write full sentences for questions asking you to answer in English or Spanish. And question A here says, menciona dos actividades que son buenas para los niños, meaning mention two activities which are good for children. It's worth noting definitely that this is worth 2 marks and that they're asking for two activities. So if you give just one, then you would lose a mark inevitably. And if you give 3, then you still also risk losing a mark if you make a mistake, for instance, in your Spanish when giving that third activity. So I would always give just the number of pieces of information that are required. No more, no less. Okay, again, for these questions, try and lift directly from the Spanish text as much as you can. You may well have to make some changes to the answers. Not necessarily, that's not necessarily the case, but you'll often have to change the pronouns. For example, if the text is written in the first person, you would have to change that I to he or she or it. You would not write as if you are the subject or the person speaking, as that would sound very odd. And you may well have to change smaller things like verb forms as well. So if we look at this particular question, mention two activities that are good for children. Those are mentioned here in the first paragraph where it says, nuestro director dice que cuando los alumnos de primaria aprenden a tocar un instrumento, mejora su memoria y que los que juegan al ajedrez tienen más concentración. Which means our headmaster says that when primary school children learn to play an instrument, it improves their memory, and that those who play chess have more concentration. So that clearly indicates the two answers, tocar un instrumento, playing a musical instrument, and jugar al ajedrez. So I would be careful, though, when you're writing out the answers in Spanish. It would be best to use the infinitives for both of these verbs. It would make more sense or sound more natural in Spanish, although I believe you would be given the mark in any case. So it is best, as I've done here, to put these both in the infinitive form, tocar un instrumento and jugar al ajedrez. You can see where the answers come from within the text as well. Do try and check through the grammar as well, and make sure that you use the text to help you as much as possible. So the trick for these answering in Spanish questions is to actually copy from the text as much as you can and try and change as little as you can get away with. But be aware that you may have to change pronouns or verb forms in particular, possibly other pieces of information too. Okay, now there's just time for a brief quiz on different reading exam question types for Spanish GCSE and iGCSE. So, question number 1. How many times can you read over the same text in the reading exam? I'll give you a little bit of time to think over this, and then I will show you the correct answer. Right, here comes the answer then. So the answer for this is actually as many times as you want. The reading exam is different to the listening paper. There's no limit as to how many times you will hear the sources or read the sources, but the limit is the time available. So, of course, you need to be able to read the paper as much as possible and certainly check over your work as well. But as long as you've got the time, there's no specific limit as to how many times, how many instances you can go back and read previous questions or look over questions you've already completed in the reading paper specifically. Number 2 is true or false. Eliminating wrong answers can be a useful tactic for any multiple choice questions. Is that true or is it false? Definitely something that did come up in the video. Okay, that should be enough time. So let me reveal the answer. This one's definitely true. This can be an extremely useful tactic whenever you have to choose between options. So for any multiple choice type questions, when you're identifying the correct statements as well, mentally eliminating or ruling out answers that you know to be wrong can really help you to get marks. Question number 3 is also true or false. The reading exam will often contain trick questions. Again, something was talked about a bit. Let me give you some seconds to think over this. Okay, I'm going to share the answer to this now. This one is true as well. And for that reason, you have to be very careful not to select the first answer that you think is correct, and to check the finer details as well, because there can be contradictions. Another thing that they love to do is to mention every single one of the options. So you do need to pay some attention to the smaller details. Yeah, and make sure that you do not get tricked by these common tricky questions. Question 4 then, how can you use the original text to help you if answering in English or in Spanish? Let me give you a bit of time to think through this. This is something that was covered towards the end. Okay, here comes the answer now. So the answer is, well, you can locate where the correct answer is in the text, and then you have to either translate the appropriate part into English if you're answering in English, or if you have to answer in Spanish, then you copy out the relevant part from the original text as much as possible. But be aware that you may well have to make changes if necessary, and make sure that you include all of the required details that the question itself is asking for too. Okay, so if you have any questions on any of this, or if you'd like to know more about more personalized help, which I offer as well, you can get in touch by email, through Facebook, or Instagram. I post every single day on Facebook, Instagram, and even LinkedIn, sharing my love of languages with the world, encouraging people to learn languages, making sure they know how to do that effectively and in fun ways too. But I post a lot about GCSE and iGCSE languages too, helping people to create revision plans, giving tips on how to revise, and more. So I highly recommend following me on each of these platforms. I have many resources, including free resources available, and that includes for Spanish, GCSE, and iGCSE, as well as for other languages. I do offer one-to-one help, group classes, courses, and more. So if you'd like to know more about any of that, just get in touch.